We deliver roster breakdowns here at the Voice of College Football as we enter fall camp across the nation. We got Brian Driscoll on the line. Notre Dame's up now. All right, Brian. When we look at the Irish coming off, let's say 10-2, of course, ACC regular season championship, a second college football playoff appearance in 3 years. People are expecting a down year. That's pretty much a general consensus that I'm hearing all over the place. We'll get your thoughts on that in a second. Let's dive into the personnel. First and foremost, at quarterback. People are not impressed with the addition of Jack Cohn. That's generally, again, what I get across the board. I watched him play a lot of football at Wisconsin. Is he Ian Book without the mobility to that extent? He had a 19-5 TD to pick ratio and leading Wisconsin to a Rose Bowl 70% completion percentage. And will there be a true quarterback battle in fall camp?
Well, I'll go with the quarterback battle. Will there be a battle? Yeah, I think there will be, because Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner are really talented young players, and I think that they've earned the right to at least be in the conversation to compete with Jack Cohn. Do I think there's going to be a battle in that they're seriously going to challenge Jack Cohn for the starting job? No, I don't. I'm a lot higher on Jack Cohn than most people are. And, I'll be honest with you, Mark, when I first heard that Notre Dame was looking at Jack Cohn, I was a little bit like, really? Because I had the same thought you did. I watched him in Wisconsin. It was kind of a dull offense. They didn't ask him to make a ton of plays, just handed it off to Jonathan Taylor a lot. But then I dive into the All-22 film, and I'm seeing a kid that's throwing the ball in tremendous anticipation, tremendous ball placement, a kid that's got some guts. He's going to fit the ball into some tight windows, something we haven't seen from Notre Dame's quarterback in several seasons, even before Ian Book. He's a guy that understands where the ball has to go. There's some parts of his game he has to clean up. I think sometimes in that attempt to make a play, he holds onto the ball too long, will get hit from the backside and lose the ball. I want to see that cleaned up. But this is a guy that, in my opinion, has an opportunity to take Notre Dame's pass game to a whole new level. And what a lot of people don't realize about Notre Dame's offense the last really 2 years, especially in 19 and 20, is, there were so many opportunities for Notre Dame to be better and more effective and more explosive in the pass game, but Ian Book was just not a guy that was comfortable going past read 1 and 2. And he wasn't a guy that was comfortable really attacking teams down the field. When he did, the offense was pretty good. We saw that in the first half against Clemson last year. We saw that in the first half against Florida State last year. More often than not, he wasn't willing to do that. And, I could go back to the Clemson game in 2018 when it's a 0-0 ball game. Chase Claypool beats a guy on a post, or excuse me, Miles Boykin beats a guy on a post route. Same throw that Ian Book made to win the game against Pitt. And instead of climbing the pocket, letting it go, and maybe it's 1st and goal, or maybe it's 7-0, he tries to tuck it and run, gets stripped, fumbles. Clemson picks it up, goes down on that next series, kicks field goal. So, you're talking about a 10-point swing and a momentum swing. And we saw that throughout his career, just that unwillingness to take those shots. And Jack Cohn is not unwilling to take those shots. And he was an effective deep ball thrower. So I think he's going to be successful. I just have a hard time fathoming how he went 10-2 in the regular season at Wisconsin against a relatively challenging schedule. Played Ohio State that year, played a really good Minnesota team on the road that year. I'm talking about regular season. But then you talk about 3 of the 4 losses were 2 to the number 3 team in the country in Ohio State, and then they lost by a point in the Rose Bowl to Oregon, who had that guy, Justin Herbert, pretty decent player. Yet he's going to come to Notre Dame, where Wisconsin's the toughest team on their schedule, and they're going to go 8-4 or 9-3. I don't understand this. I think what's happening is there's still this view of Notre Dame that they are the Notre Dame of pre-2017. Brian Kelly has shown that they can reload. We talk about the offensive line and so, how are they going to do offensive line? Well, the year after they lost Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, and then Alex Bars gets hurt in the 5th game of the year, Notre Dame went 12-0. Right? So we've seen them do this before. They lost 2 starting defensive ends to the NFL draft. They lost Jerry Tillery after 2018, and yet this past year the defensive line went out and just reloaded with 2 new starters at end that then went and got drafted. Notre Dame has recruited and developed to the point now where I believe they're in reload mode. A lot of people don't think that. I also think that a lot of people think Ian Book had a lot more to do with their success than I think Ian Book had to do with their success. And I don't think people are talking enough about Marcus Freeman and the impact I think he's going to make as the defensive coordinator. I think that's another thing. There's just a lot of things that I think people are going to realize, we probably should have paid more attention to that instead of just assuming that Notre Dame was going to go back to what they were before 2017.
So you mentioned the offensive line. So the new guys that are stepping in, what are their credentials? Did they receive any meaningful playing time last year?
Yeah, so Josh Lugg is going to step into the right tackle job. He actually started at center 2 of the last 3 games of the year. He's not a center. He's like 6'7". They should not have played him at center, but he actually stepped in 2019. Robert Hainsey got hurt against Virginia Tech, which was game 8. Josh Lugg stepped in, started the final 5 games of the season. Notre Dame went 5-0, scored over 40 points several times, and played well. And was he as good as Robert Hainsey? No, not quite. Robert Hainsey was a 3rd-round NFL draft pick, but Josh Lugg was a good football player. So he's got 9 career starts under his belt. That's one of the newcomers. You've got Zeke Correll stepping into the starting lineup, either at center or left guard, depending on what they're going to do with Jarrett Patterson. I believe they're going to put Zeke Correll guard, put Jarrett Patterson back to center, who's a 2-year starter and a preseason All-American. Zeke Correll started 2 games last year. He started at North Carolina, big win for Notre Dame, pretty big game for Notre Dame on the road against the top 15 team. And then he started the Rose Bowl, again, pretty big game for Notre Dame. So he's only got 2 starts, but they were pretty big moments. He's a former top 100 recruit. They got Kane Madden to transfer in from Marshall. I'm not as high on him as some other people are, but he's a 3-year starter. Big, strong, tough kid, big physical kid. Well, big and girth-wise, he's on the short side, but he's 305, 310 pounds. So he's got a lot of experience. And then the only guy that doesn't have experience is 6'6", 330-pound, 5-star left tackle freshman. So Blake Fisher. So, the line should be good. I don't think it has to be great, but look, the line wasn't great in 2018 and they went 12-0. The line was even worse in 2019 and they went 10-2. So again, I just don't see what evidence people have of why we should expect Notre Dame to take a step back. Like there's people that predict them to lose to North Carolina. I'm like, well, North Carolina's 2,000-yard rushers and a 1,000-yard receiver and their leading tackler, yet they're going to get better, yet Notre Dame's going to take a step back. It's been a confusing analysis of what people's Notre Dame expectations are.
I'm curious about Kane Madden. So what intrigues me is here we've got a player from Marshall who was named as 2nd-team All-American. So obviously there are people out there that make those evaluations, and we're talking about at the only position on the football field where there is no statistics. Like this isn't a Marshall wide receiver who just had eye-popping ridiculous stats, so he supplants a bunch of Power 5 guys as a 1st or 2nd-team All-American. So there must be something there, but you're letting me know that you're not quite as high as everybody else is on that edition.
Yeah, if he was at Notre Dame last year, he wouldn't have been a 2nd-team All-American. I don't even think he would have started. Maybe he would have battled Tommy Kramer. But I think a lot of this is driven by Pro Football Focus. They have him ranked incredibly high. They have him as a preseason 1st-team All-American. Pro Football Focus also had Nolan Turner from Clemson with a higher grade than Kyle Hamilton. So some of that I take with a grain of salt. They don't have Kyron Williams or Michael Mayer's top 10 returning players in their positions in the country, whatever. So I think a lot of it is driven by that because, as you said, how many people that you think vote for All-American awards sit down there and watch all 22 film of all these offensive linemen, right? They don't. And that's whatever. It is what it is. It's always been that way. So I don't have a problem with it. But so they're going to use whatever data they can find. And Pro Football Focus is perceived to be a really good source of information. In some ways they are, and in other ways they're not. So I think a lot of it is that, but I think he was a very, very good player at Marshall. I mean, a very good player at Marshall. But the problem is there are certain limitations that the teams he played against for Florida Atlantic and Florida International and Louisiana Tech and Western Kentucky, they couldn't expose some of the areas that he's going to have to improve upon as he's playing against USC and North Carolina and Wisconsin and Florida State and, Purdue and USC and programs like that. And if you get into his sphere of influence, he's gonna whoop you. He's a big, strong kid. He's very technically sound, very fundamentally sound. The problem is he doesn't move real well, and at least he didn't on film at Marshall. Maybe he'll be better in that regards now, but he didn't move real well. And Notre Dame does a lot of outside zone, a lot of perimeter stuff, working the second level, so a lot of counter, tray type stuff where the guard pulls and kicks out. Those are things that he didn't necessarily thrive on at Marshall. Marshall did a good job of saying, "Hey, we're going to run right at people." And we're going to let this big old kid just go beat you up. Maybe Notre Dame adjust their run game to fit more what he does, but he just didn't show the movement skills to play like a 2nd-team All-American. But I don't think he has to play like that at Notre Dame, though. I think if he's just a solid, okay starter, that's fine. He's experienced and he's tough. They've got Jarrett Patterson who can play like an All-American. Blake Fisher's going to be good. Josh Lugg can play at a high level. And I'm a big believer, Mark, that you could have 2 All-Americans and have a mediocre offensive line. My evidence of that, Notre Dame's 2016 offensive line. They went 4-8, but had 2 All-Americans, Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson. It's about, can you get your 5 to play well together? That's going to be the key. And that's where I'm more confident that this line is going to at least be solid. And that's all they need them to be this year, in my opinion. It's just solid. Just do your job. You don't have to dominate like last year. You don't have to dominate like 2017. Just do your job. Don't make big mistakes. Don't let the quarterback get hit. If they can do that, then I think Notre Dame's got the skill to still be a really, really good football team this year.
Yeah, the combinations up front and the cohesion required is undervalued by a lot of people out there in regards to offensive line play. No question about that. Those guys need to be smart and working together like no other unit on either side of the football. So you mentioned the running game. Kyren Williams and Chris Tyree seem to be a near perfect complement to each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a great observation. You look at Kyren Williams, he's kind of that bell cow, and he's a guy that had over 200 carries last year, can run with physicality, can make you miss behind the line of scrimmage, can make you miss in space. But he's not necessarily a home run hitter. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry last year. That's the lowest the starting Notre Dame running back has had since 2014. But part of that was due to teams just not respecting Notre Dame's run game. They got a lot of 9 in the boxes last year, so you could say it was kind of impressive when you consider how many defenders he had to make miss. But and he's a very unique pass catcher that we didn't see a ton of last year. We saw it at times, and they used it against BC. But he was a wide receiver up until his junior year of high school. He's a kid that graduated from high school with over 3,000 rushing yards, and I believe he had over 2,000 receiving yards in his career. So he knows how to catch the ball in different ways. I think you could see him. That allows them to use Kyren Williams and Chris Tyree together. Chris Tyree is a guy that doesn't need 15 touches to make an impact, as we saw last year. His first carry against Clemson goes for a touchdown, right? His first carry against Alabama goes for 27 yards. His first carry against Syracuse went for 94 yards, right? He doesn't need 15 carries to make an impact, and I think that fits well with Kyren Williams. But now you can up Chris Tyree's volume because now you can put Kyren Williams outside. I remember their first fall camp. You've got Kyren Williams going in the slot, going against Kyle Hamilton and just screwing Kyle Hamilton into the ground because he's a good route runner, like a receiver type of route runner. You can use that. You can use Chris Tyree in the backfield or out of the backfield in the pass game. So you can play them together more in more ways with more schematic variety than most teams can with their top 2 backs. And that's, to me, what makes them very unique. And I think we're going to see an offense that's built around those 2 players being focal points this year.
We got Brian Driscoll on the line from Irish Breakdown. Please join his podcast right there. And it's just a wealth of information, but you can get information all over the place. It's the insight beyond the information and the facts and the stats that really do it tremendous value there. Again, Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown. So when we look at, we'll merge the tight end position with Michael Mayer, one of the best in the business, 42 catches last year, into the wide receiver spot. Javon McKinley's gone. I've been hearing about Braden Lindsey, Kevin Austin, and what their impact could be for a few years now. I know that Notre Dame fans are just waiting for there to be more explosiveness on the outside, and the parts are there.
Sure. Well, you look at Braden Lindsey, we got a glimpse of him sort of the second half of the 2019 season. He was injured in fall camp, which has been a big problem for him throughout his career. That's the reason he had 7 catches for -7, for less than 70 yards this past season. Couldn't be healthy. He was healthy in 2019. His first big play of the season was, as part of the rotation, was a 51-yard touchdown on a reverse against USC. He also had a 72-yard touchdown on a post route against Navy. Had a 61-yard touchdown on a jet sweep against Boston College, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that Braden Lindsey brings to the table. Is he's a home run threat. He's not a high-volume player, but he's a home run threat. Well, what was something that was missing from the offense last year, Mark? It was the ability to have a home run threat in the pass game. And Braden can bring that. He's not, to me, a guy that you want to play 60 snaps a game. I don't know if he's a guy that can handle that kind of volume. He just hasn't in his career, but you bring him in and he can do that. Ken Austin, guy that hasn't flashed that on games. We've seen him in practice just embarrass Notre Dame defensive backs, but he's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay locked in. He's a kid that broke his foot twice last year, so I'm a little concerned and skeptical about, just how good and explosive he can be. But if those 2 guys play to their potential and stay healthy, you're talking about two dynamic players that come in different packages. Braden Lindsey's 5'11", a $185. Burner, Kevin Austin, 6'2", 210, huge catch radius. So they do it in different ways. And then you talk about a guy like Lawrence Keys, who's a really dynamic athlete as well from New Orleans. He had 5 catches for over 100 yards in the spring game. He had a great spring. Avery Davis was a very steady player last year. Clemson found out what Avery Davis can do when he's given an opportunity. Not just the big 50-plus yard gain late in the game, but then he scored the game-tying touchdown with just seconds left in regulation. So he's a dynamic kid, former quarterback. And then there's a kid that I'm really excited to see this year from Nebraska. He's a sophomore named Xavier Watts, who I think can be a really, really outstanding player. And he's a very versatile player, has some Kevin Austin to his game, has some, Braden Lindsey, Avery Davis to his game. So I think he could be a weapon. But there's a lot of ifs there, Mark. That's the big concern I have. A lot of ifs. If Braden Lindsey's healthy, if Kevin Austin is healthy, if Lawrence Keys can take the next step, if they can develop Xavier Watts, something that Del Alexander has not done a good job of developing younger receivers since he's been here. And then I didn't even get into the freshmen like Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey. So the talent is there. You've got Michael Mayer at tight end, who's a stud. And a guy that not a lot of people talking about is George Takis. I mean, if George Takis steps up, he's a former 4-star recruit who was just buried behind a couple other NFL offensive tight ends in his career. But in the few opportunities he's got, he's looked good, and he's 6'6", 250. So if he steps in as the number 2 tight end, then Michael Mayer's your small guy. I mean, that's kind of a nice proposition to have. So, there's a lot of talent there, Mark. But as a coach, my concern is, yes, we have a lot of talent, looking at it from a coach's standpoint, but there's just not a lot of proven answers. And I'm just someone who likes proven answers. So, that's why I haven't been on the Notre Dame's going to be a playoff team push yet, because I want to see some of those questions get answered. But the tools are in place for it to happen. Now, just some guys got to step up and play at a level that we haven't seen a ton. And that's going to be the key for him, in my opinion.
Takis caught 3 balls last year. Avery Davis, 24 receptions, 2 touchdowns.